Welcome to Historican, the podcast that serves as a living archive of the Puerto Rican diaspora. Here, we center the voices, memories, and stories that have shaped who we are, past, present, and future. We honor the legacies our ancestors left and the ones we're building now through resistance, creativity, and cultural pride. Today's episode is especially meaningful. Our guest is a creative force whose work has redefined what it means to be a Boricua storyteller. He's a writer, graphic novelist, and activist, best known as the creator of La Borinqueña, the first Afro-Boricua superhero who draws her strength from Puerto Rico's natural elements and ancestral heritage. His comics blend Taino folklore, history, and justice into a vibrant and powerful narrative that resonates across generations. He's the founder of Somos Artes, has collaborated with Marvel Comics, and helped bring to life the anthology Reconstruction, which united artists and heroes to support Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. But for me, this is personal. Edgardo and I go back to Muévete days in New York when we first joined forces to organize for our communities, and later working side by side on the documentary Pa'lante, Siempre Pa'lante, honoring the legacy of the Young Lords. So today's not just a conversation, it's a reunion, one rooted in our shared love for cultura, comunidad, creation, and plátanos. Edgar, I'm happy to have you with us.
Guys, this is dope. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate that intro. I might need to use that so that I don't have to chat GPT something. I'm excited about this conversation.
Thank you. So Edgar, before the books, before the costume, before the spotlight, tell us about what first sparked that fire in you to tell stories, to become this griot.
Wow. It started when I was a child, growing up in the city, New York. Grew up in a public school system. And I remember, must have been maybe third or fourth grade. I was in a class, Miss Morales, as Afro-Puerto Rican teacher. Every week she would write 10 vocabulary words. And the assignment was, learn what these words are, write me sentences showing that you understand these words by writing something that contextualizes the definition. On my own, I took this as an assignment to create an episodic story. So every week, I would take 10 new words that I was learning and add it to an ongoing story that I created about two raccoons from the Bronx. Ricky and Tricky. And I would incorporate science and just madcap adventures. And at the end of my story for the week, I would draw an illustration of these two, raccoons. And that went on. And then I recall that by the time I was in middle school, I was actually being commissioned by many of my classmates to create original comics for them. And they would pay me a couple of quarters, and I would use that to buy real comics, and they would ask me, I want Iron Man versus Captain America, and I would go home, illustrate it, write it, staple it, and literally sell them the original comic, because there were no photocopy machines or any printers back then. And if it wasn't me selling my comics to make some money, it was also me walking my dog and collecting bottles and cans, which is hilariously still a nickel. 40 years later, it's still a nickel for the same can, even though the comics back then were 50 cents. Now they're $5. And I grew up in abject poverty. By the time I was 18, I lived in 22 different places throughout New York City, Puerto Rico, Pennsylvania, to New York. And it wasn't until we met in our early 20s that I finally had a semblance of stability, and I moved to Brooklyn. And I've been in Brooklyn for the last 32 years, literally just maybe 3 residences in the same neighborhood. So that, for me, was the most consistent life I've had in my entire life. Because when I moved to a completely different neighborhood, different city, and I was uprooted, and I was like the perpetual new kid all the time. And I would always draw friends into my life by drawing. And that was kind of like my hook. I was not an athlete. I was not an MC. I was not a b-boy, but I loved to draw. And occasionally children would walk by my desk or the lunch table and they would see me and they're like, oh, that's dope. And that turned into a conversation. There was one time I remember somebody wanted me to battle this other guy because, oh, yeah, well, this guy's nicer than you. And I'm like, what? Good for him. So that's honestly, that's the foundation. And then I evolved into becoming an educator, an activist, a graphic designer. When I was teaching, I experienced what some in contemporary culture would refer to as canceling, when a right-wing journalist scapegoated me when she was trying to attack this movement of education that was being led by people of color to introduce progressive teachings, progressive approaches to present models inspired by Augusto Boal or Paulo Freire, pedagogy of the oppressed, and also more specifically bringing hip hop into classes. And when this journalist found her way into my classroom because the wrong person was running the school that day, because the main person was out at a meeting, homegirl just came in unannounced. I was like completely caught off guard. And typically, as those of us who are media savvy, you prepare, you fix your hair, you dress up, you clean up the space, right? And this person literally came in, and it's like the equivalent of your laundry was on the sofa, and then the dishes were still in the sink. And that was for me incredibly alarming, because as a young person, I was immediately thinking that we needed to be reactionary, but I didn't have the hindsight of someone who was running that institution like my mentors did. I could have completely disrupted their funding. So I kind of like said, well, what's going to happen? And I decided I'm leaving. And I pulled out. I pulled out of the public eye as an activist, and I just became a graphic designer. And I lived that life, what would be referred to as being off the grid, for the next decade. And I was just a graphic designer. I was not marching on the streets anymore. I wasn't organizing conferences. I was just laying in the cut, just being a creative. I'm raising my son, my oldest son, who is now a senior in college. And then it wasn't until my marriage now with my wife, Kyung, that I reconnected to my Puerto Ricanness in a way that really resonated to my days as an activist. Like, it really recharged those discourses, that energy, that passion. And I started producing comics with Daryl McDaniels from Run DMC. I started producing comics for John Leguizamo and developed that skill set. So at this point, I was like, I know how to make these books for other people. I want to make my own book. And when I saw what was happening in Puerto Rico, when Governor Padilla had announced that Puerto Rico had amassed a $74 million debt that was unpayable, I knew, because of my history, my knowledge base, that this was endemic to Puerto Rico's colonial status. And I also knew that most people, and we're talking 2015, didn't understand what it was to be Puerto Riqueño, and even Puerto Ricanos themselves, right? And so that's when I kind of said, I want to do something. And I grew up as a young person remembering when Michael Jackson did the We Are the World, and Lil Stevie did the Sun City, artists organized against apartheid, and all of these like musicians that did these incredibly powerful pop cultural moments, even up Geldorf with what you call it, the Christmas song that raised money for children in Ethiopia and other parts of Africa. I was like, we need something to kind of like raise awareness. And in the midst of understanding that pop culture in the United States was completely centered around superhero culture, I also understood that we were completely underrepresented. And in real talk, we were invisible. And so I really saw this as an opportunity, with the skill set I had of already knowing how to produce and publish books, to develop my own IP, to develop my own intellectual property, but an intellectual property that would be like a license from the people, licensed from and tethered to a movement, so that I could use this pop cultural project to engage people in a discourse that went beyond Puerto Rico. And that's what we've been doing for the last 9.5 years, with Comic-Con appearances, library appearances, museums. Just recently gave a keynote at the MacArthur Foundation. This is stuff that people who generally make comics don't even do. And I've literally blazed my own trail. I think a lot of that has to do with my background as an activist, as an educator, as the Puerto Rican, who is literally the embodiment of colonization. We still are colonized people, and that's something that I'm incredibly aware and conscious of, and that goes a lot into my work. Standing now as a man who's 55, I'm a father, I'm a husband, but I also in my youth was an educator. So all of those ingredients kind of come together to make this sancocho that is, for me, this unique formula that I created that is La Borinqueña, and continues to challenge what popular culture is, what the superhero narrative is, which oftentimes is really just a narrative that is dominated by a patriarchal approach of storytelling, a white male fantastical approach of storytelling that sensationalizes women, diminishes narratives centered around people of color, that tokenizes appearances of people of color, but doesn't give us the depth that embraces and celebrates what makes us all unique as humans, our very humanity. And so I feel that by making La Borinqueña, I embrace the nuances of being Boricua, of being Latin, of being a person of color, a person of African descent, and bring that into the fray so that everyone can be a part of this conversation. And so this method of storytelling is something that came from my childhood. It developed in my young adulthood. It shut down for a while, went into this hibernation mode, and when it woke up with a new purpose and with a new drive. And like our documentaries, sigue pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. By the way, that's my signature. Stanley has Excelsior. Every time I autograph books, I put my name and I always think to myself, that's mine now.
I love that.
I wanted to ask you something. You talked a little bit about growing up, being poor, moving from place to place, what you went through at that institution, the complexity of Puerto Rican identity, right? We have questions of ourselves, of who are we? Was there some of that you struggle with, like the self-doubt of who you are? And that maybe that caused that disconnect a little bit? And then if you could talk about how you found that connection again, what was it that sparked that desire and wanted to connect that? Because I think that just shows the beauty of who we are as a Puerto Rican people, that resilience.
I mean, I still every day struggle with the imposter syndrome, even today, every day. I think that is what makes me a good storyteller and a good artist, because I don't believe my own hype. I never do. And I was just talking to my protege yesterday. I literally call him my sobrino, and we were talking about art and making art. And I told him what I used to tell all my students like 30 years ago when I used to teach high school. It's like, the best work of art you've made is your next one. And that's my mantra with everything I do. Like while I'm working on something, this is the best that I'm working on. Right now I'm working on my new book, The Gigante, and I'm super excited about it. It's coming together. It's looking dope. And I know that when this book is done and it's out there and the fans get it and the media starts covering it, I'm going to be hype about it. And then when that settles, I'm going to be like, okay, the next one is going to be better than this. And this is my 8th book that I've self-published. And so I struggle with this kind of like, who am I? What am I doing? Seriously? And also, I'm still in this space that it's still comics. Yeah, it's 2025, and the 2 biggest movies in the box office right now are driven by superheroes. But the reality is that is nothing from my reality with making comics. Comics is in the space of the tens of thousands of dollars, not the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I am in a space that still, as a pop cultural genre of expression, is still very niche. Many of Americans do not read comic books. The majority of Americans don't even freaking read. Let's say that's so, but like the reality is we don't mostly read comics. And I am frequently embraced by fans who are like, oh man, I love La Borinqueña. I'm such a fan. And like, oh, what do you think about the stories? Nah, B, I haven't read any of the stories yet, but I love La Borinqueña. And I always love the metaphor of food. I love food. And, because people will say, yo, but when the movie comes out, I'm going to be the first in line. I'm like, but there's no movie. Why don't you read what we already got? It's like if somebody goes up to a food truck selling like pastelillo, they're like, Papa, those are pastelillos, man. Let me tell you, bro, when you open up that restaurant, I'm going to be the first in line. I'm like, that's cool. Would you like some? No, I'm good. Have you eaten them before? Nah, but I'm sure they're slamming. It's like, come on. It's part of that colonized mindset that we have. So that's where I continue to struggle, and what helped reawaken my pride and my love for being Puerto Rican was Kyung, my wife. My wife is from Jersey, Korean American. Her mom back in the days used to have a men's fashion store. That was the spots. Oh, yo, I'm gonna check out the spot. They got the new, Taylors or the new Jordache and the new Lees. And that was like her mom. Her mom had the spot, and she had like a Puerto Rican or Dominican that was doing the tailoring and stuff. So my wife grew up around Puerto Rican culture, and her mom was like blasting freestyle and eating bacalao. And so when we connected, she was like, yo, we should go to Puerto Rico. I want to check out where your family's from, where you're from. What was amazing about traveling with her is I traveled. Before her, in my previous relationships, I would just stay like in la sofá.
First time you went to PR?
Holy cow, with her, we've traveled the entire island because she loves to explore. We've gone to the waterfalls in Gozalandia and San Sebastián. We've gone to Parque Ceremonial in Utuado. We've gone to La Piedra Escrita in Jayuya. Oh my gosh, we've gone like all over, and we bring our sons, and our sons get to kind of like explore Cueva Ventana and Arecibo, El Yunque and Rio Grande, Ponce. Like we literally, like we don't San Juan our Puerto Rican experience as Puerto Ricans from the diaspora. And so when I came up with this idea to write La Borinqueña, it was Kyung. She was like, okay, cool, let's go to Puerto Rico for like a month. I was like, that. And we moved to Puerto Rico for like a month back in 2016. So I came up with the idea of La Borinqueña, announced it. I didn't have the full comic yet. It went viral. I announced it at a press conference, Puerto Rican Day Parade. The month before the parade, we had a float. Still no comic book. We had a woman wearing a costume. Still no comic book. And Kyung was like, yo, we need to make that comic. People are expecting this book. Let's go. So we moved to Puerto Rico, stayed with family, rented a hotel, took both of our sons, our youngest who was just a newborn. And I remember walking through El Yunque, and her origin story just kind of like came to me. One of my friends, who's the executive director of Humanidades Puerto Rico, which is the NEH of Puerto Rico, told Kyung, who shared with me, that a lot of people say that I'm like a brujo because a lot of the stuff that I write about in the comics come true, because there's a lot of prescient storytelling to my books. I'm talking about climate change, talking about government corruption. And she told Kyung those are the ancestors whispering into his ears. And so I felt that when I was walking through a Yunque, I felt, mira, se me paran los pelos. I felt the ancestors speaking to me, like flowing through me, just like that water that was flowing through my feet when I walked through the river. And I would get into conversations con meseros, con choferes, con cualquier persona. I had I had no pretense to any conversation, from scholars to busboys. I wanted to talk to everybody. I wanted to understand Puerto Rican vernacular. I wanted to understand Puerto Rican culture that was living in Puerto Rico, because as a Puerto Rican from the diaspora, I came to understand that our cultural expressions are time capsuled expressions that come from our families. Even our vernacular, it's kind of like locked and frozen in time. And then it kind of evolves depending on what region we grow up in, whether it's Humboldt Park, whether it's East Harlem, whether it's Villa Victoria in Boston. It depends, because every region has like its own vernacular. Pero I knew that if I was going to write a story that sounded authentically Puerto Rican, I needed to speak to Puerto Ricans. And I remember one of the conversations I had was actually with an Afro-Latina of Venezuelan Dominican ancestry, who was like, pero yo soy boricua porque yo nací acá. And that blew me away, because I was like, that's what kind of like, it started hitting me like, yo, we're not a race, we're an ethnicity. I can live in Puerto Rican and be of all this other ancestry, but my ethnicity is Puerto Rican because I live in Puerto Rico. And I may live in the United States and my heritage may be Puerto Rican, or I may live in Brooklyn, but my ethnicity is Puerto Rican. And this young woman, I was talking to her about the idea of developing La Borinqueña, and I was like, sí, y ella said, va a ser trigueña. And she goes, yo no soy pan, yo soy negra. And I'm listening to her, and that's when it hit me. Trigueña comes from trigo, which comes from wheat, which comes from an era. When my mom came here back before then, people used to refer to people of African descent as trigueño. They wouldn't say negro. They didn't say Afro. I mean, even though the first person to use the phrase Afro-Puerto Riqueño was Arturo Schomburg, it's not like that became like everyone was using it. Mad people don't even know who Arturo Schomburg is. And so when I spoke to the sister, it kind of awoken in me how fluid, and a lot of this stuck with me. And I started forging relationships with young Puerto Ricans. In fact, my editor, who lives in Rio Piedras, was in her 20s when we started, and she had just graduated. And I was like, that needs to be my editor, so that she can keep this vernacular tethered to youth, so she can keep this vernacular tethered to Puerto Ricans. And what's trippy about all the young artists that I work with in Puerto Rico, they all speak English. And they're all born and raised in Puerto Rico, but they all speak English. And I'm like, por favor, háblame en español que yo tengo que practicar, you know. That was kind of like how I reconnected. And it was through family, through my wife, through my sons. And then after Maria, all my family lost their homes. So all my immediately close family, they left Puerto Rico. I have distant cousins. No, I don't have relationships with them. I just have DNA with them. But the family that I would like sit down and eat dinner and visit, that's part of my itinerary, they all lost their homes and they moved. So now when we travel to Puerto Rico, it's about the friendships we've created through our philanthropy, through the charity work we've done that has created a new extended family for us. The activism and advocacy that we do is something that our sons are learning. We visit enough that we have friends that we hook up with. We're going to have dinner. We're going to stay over. We're going to do this. And our sons are seeing this. And I'm giving them what I didn't get, which is a connection to Puerto Rico through our activism, our love for the culture, our love for the food, for the music. And it's something that is also happening with this kind of cultural movement that's obviously being spearheaded on a global level by Bad Bunny. But it's bigger than Bad Bunny. And it's something that I refer to as the Maria phenomena. And this is something that I developed myself. After Maria in 2017, there was an awakening in the diaspora from millennials and from Gen Z. I'm not talking about our generation, not Gen X. I'm talking about the younger generation. It became very real for them that Puerto Rico could be gone and that our heritage could be erased, gentrified, sold to the highest bidder. And this phenomena, and I see it because I lived down the block from Toñitas, and I've been in this neighborhood for 30 years, and Toñitas was just a spot. It was just a spot. And now she's become kind of like the epicenter for this kind of like phenomena and culture. And young people in their 30s, they've kind of lifted her up through their marketing initiative to make her this matriarch. Now, she was a matriarch in our neighborhood. I'm not downplaying her. But to be this kind of global matriarch of culture is phenomenal. But that has a lot to do with what I refer to as the Maria phenomena. And I think that La Borinqueña kind of falls within that too. What makes us a little unique is that we premiered a year before Maria. And we predicted Maria in our first book before Maria even hit. The first book didn't have a supervillain. The first book had a cataclysmic tropical storm. Because I knew that my protagonist as a woman, I didn't want her to be defined by any relationship, particularly even if it was a dysfunctional one with a supervillain. So I omitted the concept of a supervillain and introduced a natural disaster. And that came out of a conversation with Kyung, with my wife. Because when I got an opportunity to make a book for the Smithsonian, an exhibition for the Smithsonian, they gave me a huge grant. I was kind of like, okay, I want to do a mini comic for the Smithsonian while I'm still working on the main book. And she was like, well, what about a natural disaster? What about a hurricane? And I said to her, that's too big for the short story, but I'm going to put a pin in that and revisit that for the bigger story I'm working on. And that's exactly what I did. I pulled that story, that concept that she gave me, and that became the central climactic scene of the first graphic novel. And so kind of this love between me and my wife and my sons reconnected, re-sparked my love for Puerto Rico, and serves as a model for how I share this love with others when I do public speaking, when I do interviews, when I do signings and such. It's really about creating community. It's really about using our culture and our heritage to really show people that these commonalities can actually unite us and can unite us beyond the Puerto Rican diaspora and show people our shared humanity. And so that they can see themselves in our stories as well.
That's dope, brother. I gotta commend you because artists, those who are doing it right, do it for a purpose. And you being an educator and teaching, your students, but even to have that experience with that person, there's always gonna be some of our people that are like, just shut up. No, don't do that. So the fact that
I treat life like social media. If you respond to any of that, you're literally going to amplify that one knucklehead's message. Just exactly. You ignore it, nobody else notices it, literally.
And with that being said, just looking at who your protagonist is, it's a Afro-Boricua woman who's out there fighting and doing everything that she can. Through your arts, you are inspiring others. A Boricua young lady is sitting there like, I could be like her, right? What was the inspiration to bring forth a woman superhero when you yourself are a man from a perspective of being a woman and being Puerto Rican is?
It's a question that would never have been asked of me if it was a male protagonist. We're so conditioned in this patriarchal society that we'll even question why a woman superhero even exists. And that question will even be asked of me because we're conditioned to think that that is actually a valid question. But I will respect that with a response. I've always been surrounded by incredibly inspiring, powerful women. From my best friends like Vanessa, my madrinas like Iris, Marta Morovega, my tia Lillian, my wife. I've always been surrounded by these incredible, positive, powerful women. And understanding the work that goes into community development, organizing, activism, oftentimes these movements are led by women. The work is done by women. Salen los hombres con su machismo, ¿verdad? Fuerte, mira. You know, women oftentimes are not even credited for their work. The only images that exist of Mariana Bracetti is of her sewing the flag, not of her actually on a horse leading against the Spaniards. And I made a music that actually shows her out in the Florida's flag leading people into battle as La Borinqueña flies over her. Or the fact that we look at our Taino heritage and people fixate on the caciques, when in reality the cacique was actually a word that was not specific to gender. It referred to women and men. Don't get it twisted. Tainos didn't think that way. You know what I mean? And the mother goddess, the supreme entity, was a woman. And if you look at her, she's squatting, giving birth to the universe. One of my books, there's a scene where Marisol comes back. That's La Borinqueña, the alter ego, her secret identity. She comes back from Coabay, the realm of the ancestors of the Tainos, right? Comes back to reality. I was talking with my creative team. Okay, she's going to have a superhero landing. And I deconstructed and analyzed the whole concept of superhero landing, particularly from a cinematic perspective. And it is, at its core, incredibly violent. The heroes fly and they land. The first thing they do is punch the earth. And it's even mocked in some films. But it's always like, toma! And I thought to myself, so what's La Borinqueña's twist on that going to be? And she emulated Atavex's pose. So when she lands like this, squatting, one fist up and the other hand like this. And she's coming down to become one with the earth, not to punch the earth. So that kind of like symbiology into my work is very, very tethered to the women that raised me, that made me who I am. And I recognize that I'm a light complexion Puerto Rican, I'm a man, and I have more privilege. And so I have to use that to open doors and to bring in narratives that oftentimes wouldn't necessarily come from a man. So I look at myself as a reflection of the women that made me who I am today. And that man is the father to my two sons. And I try to decolonize their minds and deprogram them to disconnect from the comforts of living in a patriarchal society. And that's the approach to why La Borinqueña is powerful. But we also, as men, have to also even ask ourselves these questions. Why are we even asking these questions? Because if it was a Borinqueño, you would never ask that. And I think sometimes as men, we get so comfortable in our patriarchy that we still have to deal with sexism. We still have to deal with machismo. One of the original platforms of the Young Lords Party, remember, Vanessa? Machismo is revolutionary. Otra mujer de que espera. Son unos cabrones que están poniendo de que machismo is revolutionary. That's the most antithetical statement you could actually make.
Anti-revolutionary thing.
Are you serious? You know what I'm saying? It's like, come on. It comes from that place. And it continues to be in that space.
The amount of detail that you have put into like even the act, like how she came down and emulating the atabe, and I have to go back now and reread the book because that is beautiful. I am just so impressed because I did not even look that deeply into it.
I've always done everything I do, even as a graphic designer, with an incredibly kind of like critical lens. Even today for a client, I was working on a poster and I was looking at stock photography and I was looking at, okay, I needed to put an imagery of a black family. I was very conscious that I wanted to have the whole family. I was like, I can't just have a woman and a child, right? That's sending a very distinct message if it's just a woman and a child, and if it's just a man and a child. When I do my books, there's a lot that goes into the imagery. There's a lot that goes into the writing. I'm writing, I'm art directing, I'm conceptualizing, I'm envisioning this universe that I'm slowly building out. And I don't have the resources of a major publisher. You know, I have to emphasize I am still independently publishing this series. You know, the optics are what they may appear, but this is still coming out of a small studio space in Brooklyn. It's a literal mom and pop shop, you know, that is trying to find ways to keep ourselves sustainable, keep ourselves relevant, keep ourselves publishing, entering into spaces of like looking at crowdfunding or public speaking or grants to try to keep the project alive and also still continue our philanthropic work. You know, one of the things we are committed to is to continually find the resources to engage and support grassroots nonprofits in Puerto Rico. And that's something that we've done and makes us the only superhero series that's dedicated to charity work specifically in Puerto Rico, but broadly in any shape or form. Oftentimes, philanthropy in the space of pop culture is an afterthought. Typically comes in time of crisis. You know, for all the inspirational music and art that most pop artists give, and as much as they kind of like go public with progressive statements, they're pop stars living an incredibly wealthy life in their ivory towers. You know what I'm saying? Driving their fancy cars, sending their children to private schools. And that's not our approach. I still consider myself to be a working class artist. You know, I have a very socialist approach to my business model. I live a very modest life because I want to really kind of dedicate my work to uplifting my culture, my heritage, and to establish something that will kind of like exceed my life. And hopefully the legacy will fall into my sons and they'll carry that torch. You know what I mean? And, you know, because if you look at most of these intellectual properties that are making movies, the original creators have long since passed away. But the reality is these intellectual properties are owned by corporations that are further from what these artists could have originally envisioned. You know, but Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, these two early 20-something-year-olds from Cleveland created Superman. They were creating Superman in 1938 at the height of fascism and anti-Semitism here in the United States. And they were two Jewish American kids, you know, and they, in their own way, said, this is what we're more than. We can actually show the world that we're more than this. And that decades after their passing, their families had to sue Warner Brothers to get, you know, what they say, royalties and to get kind of like acknowledgement, you know. And pero eso no fue, that wasn't a given. So the work that I do is kind of like in that context to understand how intellectual properties are handled, but also kind of connected to the work that precedes me in the space of revolutionary work like the Young Lords. In my own way, I see this as the next evolution of the work that the Young Lords did with Palante. I really do. That's my take on it, you know, because it's 2025 and this is how you have to kind of like find new ways. You know, Gil Scott-Heron would say, you know, the revolution will not be televised. And Chuck D would say that hip hop was the CNN of our communities. Well, it's like you have to at some point realize that pop culture is the dominant cultural expression. But what do you do with pop culture then? Do you just kind of like add to it and just add to the noise? Or do you actually create something that can serve as a beacon that can actually harness our energy and focus our energy to transform our people and our communities? That's what I believe in. I believe in elevating.
How did you and Daryl connect to do this project together? Was it you were working on?
That was Riggs Morales. Riggs Morales, who's now I think he's like a VP at Def Jam. He was a VP at Atlantic Records, and prior to that, he was one of the execs at Shady Records. I was just having this conversation today with Kyung that my friends were the coolest people, you included, right? But I was always able to find something nerdy about them that they were never freaking public about. You know what I mean? And that kind of like nerdy stuff that they kept on the low, I had a little kind of like, Cerebro X-Men kind of like focus to find it and connect. And Riggs loved comics. Like I gotta text him because I remember years ago he said, yo, man, I got this Fantastic Four idea. You know what I'm saying? And he fleshed it out. I was like, yo, this is amazing, right? Like he always wanted me. He always wanted to write comics, but he was famous for being a journalist from the source. He was famous for doing A&R for all these artists. I was just visiting him at Atlantic Records, and he was like, and I was like, yo, I want to bring Key in. I want him to see your office. Riggs posed like a Orlando Calrissian Cloud City moment for me. And he was like, yeah, but before we have our meeting, I got somebody I want you to meet. You know what I mean? And he walked me down the hall in these gigantic, mahogany office doors that were probably like 20 feet high. And I'm like, who's on the other side of these doors? He opens the door, and this dude dressed in black was Daryl Mack. And he was out on the far end of the conference table. And he was like, yo, what's good? And he gave me this big hug. And I was like, what is happening here? And that turned into this conversation that Dee and Riggs had about making comics. And Riggs was like, you know what? You need to meet my boy. He's going to make you your comics. Y'all going to work together. And that's what happened. And that conversation led to me producing a trilogy of graphic novels. I re-envisioned Daryl in an alternate reality that he never became an MC. He became a superhero in the 1980s. I got graffiti writers to bless the pages with original wild style and tags. So it wasn't like regular comic book artists emulating graffiti art. It was actual graffiti legends that were dropping in their burners and all their pieces. And that led to me working with John Leguizamo because Daryl and I were doing a press junket at New York Comic Con. And as most of those events do, people cross each other's paths. And we were leaving one room and John was leaving one room and we kind of crossed paths. John recognizes Dee, Dee recognizes John. I recognize John. And John being the kind of like incredibly passionate person that really believes in the upliftment of the Latin community saw me. He saw a Puerto Rican and he was like, yo, who are you? So he immediately saw that he needed to kind of like connect with me. We exchanged numbers. And like a few weeks later, he called me up and I was like, yo, can we meet? And I go into the city, we meet. And he was like, I want to make my own comic book. Can you help me with that? And I took Freak, which was his second play, right? And adapted that into a hilarious comic book series, a mini series and such. And then we did it again and he created an original superhero and I took his screenplay and adapted it into a comic book. And that's how it all happened. It was just kind of like, people connect.
Did that, right? I remember something.
The second book I crowdfunded. Yep.
Because I participated in that. I remember that.
Yeah, that one was crowdfunded. And so and I was alluding to that kind of work gave me the confidence and a skill set to be like, I can do this. Now I was literally on set. Now I wasn't writing the scripts. I did kind of like for the Daryl books, I did the prose and the kind of like the plotting of what the larger story. I did the character design. I literally came up with Daryl's like hip hop superhero persona. I designed it, and I designed all the characters in that universe. But I didn't actually start like writing scripts until I started working on the La Borinqueña series. And Darren and I even did a Marvel comic together. We did a comic book that teamed up The Thing and Groot, a story that I wrote the whole story. And my approach was, I'm gonna write the script, and then I wrote generic lines for The Thing. And I told Dee, I was like, yo, you're gonna transcribe Ben Grimm's dialogue. You're going to take what I wrote here and then you're going to put it in your vernacular. So that's technically Daryl's voice when you would read that comic. And I wrote the whole script and Daryl came in and just changed the thing's dialogue into his vernacular. And then that led to me just kind of like wanting to do my own thing. And here we are, 9.5 years later, still doing it.
You just mentioned Groot. That coming from one of your characters, Abuela Estella.
Estela, yeah. But Estela is actually like a composite of Dr. Marta Moreno Vega and Adela from Casa Adela in Lower East Side, Manhattan.
Oh, let's go. Yeah, and so you just touched me on a whole different level, man. Me being from below and knowing Adela and the history behind Adela and that, how that brought forth community. Can you explain the character, the inspiration behind Groot, and what that really was so that those that don't know?
So writing for Marvel is like high school dating. You see that person and you go, wow, she is really, really gorgeous, but she's dating this guy. I don't got a chance. And then all of a sudden, no, but they just broke up. This is my chance. You go in, you take her out to White Castle, You had a great time. And then afterwards, you see if she's busy this weekend and y'all go see Crush Groove. It was beautiful. And then, that's it. She ghosts you. And now, now she's actually with this other dude. And that other dude turns into a significant relationship. And then you just have the story. They're like, yeah, we had a little thing, I took her out to get some White Castle and Crush Groove, but that was it, it was dope. She was mad cool. That's what writing for Marvel is like, because these are not your characters. This is not your wife. This is also not your child. You know what I'm saying? So when you go in there, you have to understand that any sazon that you apply to these characters is going into a pot that everybody's throwing all their other ingredients in, and it could turn into something delicious, or it just turns into something that you just got to dump the pot and start from scratch all over again. What I did was I decided to add my interpretation to Groot. And when I looked at the Groot character, to me, he looked like a ceiba, which is Puerto Rico's national tree. These are the trees that are like centuries old. They're originally from West Africa. Their mythologies in Central and South America, that is the atlas that holds up the world. And so I came up with this mythology based on stories of one of the oldest ceiba trees from Ponce, that the tree was literally kind of like vessel for the spirits of our ancestors, because in the times when Puerto Rico was being ravaged by the Spanish Empire, and there are some stories that some Taínos obviously fought back and others fled, and because of the design of the ceiba tree, the giant roots that almost had like little hidden chambers, Taínos would hide in the trees and avoid being captured. And so I remembered that and thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna find a way to make him Puerto Rican by having somebody else say he's Puerto Rican. And he only says I am Groot. But the thing about the character is that doesn't mean what it means. It means so much more. So I got the editors to give me permission to have him say yo soy Groot, right? And in my script, when he said yo soy Groot, dude did like a Nelson Dennis and did the whole war against Puerto Ricans when he said those 3 words in Spanish. That's how I interpreted it, right? And I came up with this idea that when Estela sees him, she's like, esa es la ceiba de Ponce. And in my head, there was this whole backstory that the creatures that come from Planet X, which is where Groot is from, when they came to Earth, they came to Borinquen. And they fought alongside the Taíno. That was the story I came up with that I never did anything with. That's like, after Crush Groove, I thought we were gonna go, to City Island and get some fried fish. Or I thought we were gonna like have a nice weekend or something, check out Orchard Beach or get on the Wonder Wheel on Coney Island. But none of that stuff ever happened. So all of that stuff goes into kind of like understanding how it is to work for Marvel. So it was a one shot, literally one story. It kind of got my foot in the door. Gave me some buzz. I had my viral moment. Media outlets all over Puerto Rico were talking about El Boricua que trabaja por Marvel, acting like I was Kevin Feige and stuff. And I used that to kind of like redirect the attention to helping me develop La Borinqueña. Because I knew I went into writing for Marvel already as an adult. I didn't go in there with these like, wild ideas. I'm gonna blow up. No, I knew that. I knew I wasn't gonna get past, my second date. I knew that this was just gonna be what it is. And with La Borinqueña, she's my daughter. She's part of my family. And long after I'm gone, she's gonna stay in our family, and that's the difference, And that's the thing. Like I look at Vanessa. Vanessa and I don't talk, but we were able to. Y'all saw it. We reconnected as if we hadn't missed a beat. This is my sister. We've known each other for over 30 years. I know we don't look it, but it's true. So yeah, that was that. That was just that's an asterisk. I mean, like my career isn't measured by this multi-trillion-dollar corporation. It's measured by the over $200,000 that I've awarded to nonprofits throughout Puerto Rico. Is measured by the glimmer in the eye of that little girl when she stands in front of the La Borinqueña costume that's in this exhibition in San Juan, and she just stands there in silent awe because she is envisioning her adventures as La Borinqueña. That young woman of any complexion still sees herself as this hero. That to me is my metric. That's what I measure it by, That Vanessa said, I got to go back and read these books. That's my measurement. That to me is what matters, because at the end of the day, if you are not contributing to something that is transformative, then you're just actually going to be risk in somebody else's life. And my work is about building a movement. That's really what it's about.
It's incredible. I love how you shared the connection that you have with deciding on fruit, making them Puerto Rican. How do you decide and pick which parts of mythology and history that you want to incorporate into La Borinqueña?
I constantly am learning new stuff. My Spanish has gotten a lot better over the years because I practice a lot more by listening to music. Over the last 20 years, I've been listening to rock en español. One of my favorite groups is Fiel a la Vega. And that's something I embraced in my adulthood. I didn't grow up with this music. And I listened to Radio Universidad, and that's like that's like public radio for Puerto Rico. And because of my smart device, I can literally stream it as if I'm in Puerto Rico listening to it. And these talk shows are dope. There was one time there was a whole episode about las carpetas. And I was like, oh, I got to bring that into my story. And if y'all don't know, carpetas literally just means the redacted folders and files on people, because the FBI had files on anyone who was involved in the independence movement.
COINTELPRO files?
Yeah, they call it
Carpeta.
carpetas because it literally means folder. And so there's a scene in this, I think it's my the third book. And it's like little things. There'll be a conversation between and I intentionally cast certain characters. I made Marisol's grandfather a police officer because I wanted to bring that narrative into the stories. So I try to find ways to incorporate history, mythology, science into everything. Cornelius P. Rhodes gets a mention. The new book I'm working on is drawing from the science of the Puerto Rican trench, which is the second deepest trench on our planet. And if you're old enough, you may remember the phenomena of the late 70s and 80s of the Bermuda Triangle, because it was actually one of the points of the Bermuda Triangle, because the Puerto Rican Trench was in the middle of that space of the triangle. And I try to organically weave in stuff so that it doesn't feel like you're reading a pamphlet or a curriculum guide. Also don't want people to feel that I'm giving them straight up history. I'm reminding them that the protagonist is flying around with a cape, and I'm interpreting. There's a lot of history out there, conflicting history, especially about the Taino stuff. The comments sometimes are hilarious on social media, but
it's funny you say that, because we just decided to add a disclaimer to all of our videos for that very reason. Like this is ever evolving. I mean, we don't know everything.
And I'm 55, so I don't have the tolerance that a 25-year-old me had, but I also know how things have intent and purpose. There's a new book that came out recently saying, well, as a matter of historical record, the original Puerto Rican flag was actually navy blue. And then you have to ask yourself, well, who does that serve? What narrative serves a population? How does that narrative serve? That's the first thing I asked myself. And I was like, okay, still like blue to me. Not gonna change it. I'm like, knock yourself out. And now there are people who are saying, no, they're not semis and goddesses. They're actually our ancestral spirits. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, I think it's like, really though? I remember once me and Edie's were at an event, and I'm not going to say what the event was, but we were at an institution. We're sitting at the event, and the two of us are like, really? So who is in the audience? And it's like, you have to be critical of your own people. You can't just be like, word. Sometimes I'm like, in fact, I'm doing speculative Afro-Taino storytelling. That's my genre. And I'm not a historian. I will go up when I do my talks, and I'll do a PowerPoint, and I'll show images that talk to you about what inspired me to create La Borinqueña. But I'm not a scholar. And if I find myself in a classroom teaching, I'm going to teach about my books. I'm not going to automatically be like, I'm the official voice of this and that. No, yo hago cómics. Déjate de todo eso, And so it's for me important to find ways to incorporate what inspires me into my stories, so that my receta is always connected and celebrating what it is to be criollo. It had that recaito, it had that, cilantro, it had the ají dulce. It's, for me, all of those ingredients is what goes into making my works good for me. That's just me. I use the word reconcile. Or maybe it's reconcile, right? Since we're on Historican. Whenever I'm writing, I always look at my scripts, and I'm like, okay, I got to reconcile this. You know, like that meme from that dude from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he's standing in front of the wall with all the push pins and post-its that are connected by yarn and stuff like that. That's my brain. My brain is wacky dacky in there, man. And so it's like I don't have post-its on my wall behind me. This is actually virtual background. I have a nice clean white wall because lo que está acá adentro es un revolú. And so I'm constantly in this space. I'm working on my new book. And before I go to bed, I start revisiting what I've done. And I'm like, okay, I got to go back and rewrite those 3 pages I already finished. The art's done. The lettering is done on the first few pages. And I'm like, oh, I got to go back and rewrite that because I just realized that this, and this is neglecting this, and that. And that's how I write, you know, and I always kind of try to find ways to keep it tethered. Even today, I was having a conversation with this Puerto Rican pop group, which also blows me away. Who freaking like reaches out to me? That's bonkers. Liza Colon-Zayas loves us. She literally reposted she's always reposting my stuff. Anthony Ramos loves us. This pop group from Puerto Rico, Domino Saints. I just learned about them. They make like house music. They're dope. They got over 100,000 followers. They love us. They were like texting me mad message. I'm like, this is crazy. Robbie Draco Rosa loves us. Hit me up like, yo, can we like, you know, can you give me your number? I wanna talk to you. And I'm like, this is crazy. But I think what is dope is that, and not all artists, right? But I think those that do reach out to us, they see the value in what we're doing. They see the art in what we're doing. And they kind of like see that we're in that kind of same space. And that's powerful. That's really, really powerful. So when I'm in the space of storytelling, I'm always trying to find ways to keep it grounded, to keep it connected. And for me, to keep it very Puerto Rican, but in a way that is still kind of approachable. Every book I write, even though they're all episodically connected, I still try to write it with a fresh set of eyes. So that if somebody just picks up that one book and they didn't pick up the other ones, they're still gonna enjoy it. Then I'll be like, "Pero qué está pasando aquí? ¿Qué es lo que está pasando aquí?" I'm always trying to find ways to kind of like you're coming into this, you're not lost. You're still gonna enjoy it. And I do it with, you know, history, but I also do it with humor. Vanessa knows me for years. I'm a smart ass. And when I write jokes. I write funny stuff intentionally into my books to keep the audience is engaged. You know, one of my favorite scenes that I wrote recently was about this new supervillain she calls herself El Dragón de Jade because she's like a dragon and she's badass. And she's about to throw down with the Nitaínos. That's La Borinqueña's team of heroes. And then, you know, Lala, who's Luz La Luminosa, she has endometriosis and she's having a flare up. So she's grabbing herself because she's in pain and she's thinking to herself, I cannot go down right now. And this is an incredibly powerful villain who is probably gonna like mince me and my team. So she resorts to jokes. She just starts ribbing on her to throw her off. And she's like, but don't dragons breathe fire? You're not like breathing fire. I mean, you look more like an iguana. I mean, you're Puerto Rican, right? So, I mean, you have like a complejo and you don't want to admit that you're like an iguana? And all of a sudden, the goons behind her, they're like, ¿sabe qué? La poli. They want a mama. And then she's like, excuse me. And then they get in, and she like wilds out and starts attacking her henchmen. And Lala and her crew, they're like, and they just bounce. And I wrote that as a joke because that's probably something I would do. I'm like, I can't fight. So I'm just going to start cracking jokes to try to get my butt out of the situation.
That's very New Yorican.
It is, you know, but it's also very Puerto Rican. Puerto Rican loves food, and Puerto Ricans are constantly like in Puerto Rico. Dude, we got the biggest potty mouths, and we're constantly dissing each other. Nobody ever comes up with cute nicknames for people. Nobody ever comes up with cute nicknames. Bad Bunny was actually a diss. The name Bad Bunny was a diss. A lot of people don't know that. They were making fun of him because they dressed him up in a hilarious freaking bunny suit, and he was a little kid. He was like so upset, and then, I mean. Bad Bunny, and that stuck. One of my friends, you know, Flaco, he's hanging out with his boy, and like the famous DJ, I forgot the DJ name, but he's actually Hector Lavoe's nephew, comes into the room, and Flaco is singing. Flaco's a child, or rather, I should say Osvaldo, and his name is Osvaldo Rivera. And what? Dude comes in and he sees Osvaldo singing, and he goes, you know, and the name stuck, right? And what about me? It was like Eggy, Egghead, because I was so smart and I was a nerd. That's my nickname, Eggy. I got a new book and I'm excited. I got jokes in that one that I'm excited about because I always find a way to make jokes.
Tell us about your new project, your book.
So the new book I'm working on is called Ve Gigante. It's inspired by the folkloric masks of Ponce, The two types of masks, they're the ones that are made of paper mache, which come from Ponce, southern Puerto Rico, and the other ones that are made from the coconut husk, which are from Loíza. But it's a play on the word de gigante because I spell it letter V, gigante, like giant. When I lived in Puerto Rico, there was a TV show called Mazinga Z or Masingel Z or Masingel, depending on how you translate it. And it was based on this giant robots toy line from Japan called the Shogun Warriors. And it's actually was Puerto Rico's first Japanese import of content. And this was like in the 80s. And it's a cartoon that was from like the 1970s. Fast forward, you got young people, Gen Z, millennials that love anime and manga in Puerto Rico. Like love it. So much so that Puerto Rico Comic Con will have like vendors that are like selling you like ramen and bubble tea. You know what I mean? And so I came up with this idea around the same time of developing La Borinqueña. I was going to create the Gigante. And I was going to create like a whole team of giant robots. And I was talking to my friend, filmmaker Reggie Hudlin, and kind of bouncing the idea of La Borinqueña, kind of getting feedback from him. And he was like, dude, do your Superwoman. That's the one. That's the one you should go with. And so I just kind of like put the Gigante on the side. And so in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I was working on my third issue of La Borinqueña, which was actually our fourth book. And I revisited the script because I had tabled it. Because I was originally going to publish it in 2019, but then my father-in-law passed, so the money we had saved, we put towards the funeral and other expenses. So when we saved up a little more money to do the next book, I revisited the script, and I felt that it was too dark, and I wanted to flip it. So I talked to my two sons, and I was like, okay, I'm going to charge you guys with something. We're going to create a superhero team for La Borinqueña, and we're going to call it the Nitainos. And my youngest son came up with Oro, El Coqui Dorado, because we had a Gigante mask that was awarded to us. So he drew a superhero based on that mask. My oldest son loves heroes that fly, like falcons. So he said, what if we did a superhero based on Puerto Rico's parrot, the iguaca? So I designed something inspired by the colors and the design of the parrot. And then I thought, oh my gosh, the Gigante, that robot, that idea that I had back in 15. And I sketched that out some more, gave the rough sketch to one of my friends who also works with us, who's an incredible illustrator, cleaned up my drawing and made it into a tight robot design. And I also had him work on it because he loves Gundam, he loves Robotech, he loves all these like anime Japanese robot TV shows and books. So I knew he was the guy to go to. And this character was introduced at the end of the third book and appeared in Oro el Coqui Dorado, appeared in the Rodario team-up book, also appeared in Luz La Luminosa, but the character is going to have their own story. And the Gigante is piloted by a young computer science major from La Universidad de Puerto Rico called Brismal de Sosa. And it's really going to be an incredibly fresh take of storytelling for me because it's going to be our first manga, which means it's going to be drawn in traditional Japanese art style. And we had an artist from Japan do one of our covers. And the artist that's working with us now, it's incredibly well versed in drawing manga. And so I'm super excited about it. And we're going to introduce more supervillains. It's going to have a lot more action because La Borinqueña as a character isn't written to be someone that's going to punch you out and knock you through a wall. That's not what her approach is. Her approach is always coming through love and always trying to channel that inner peace within us. But I can have fun with the other superheroes because they are there to throw down. And it kind of keeps the stories fun. La Borinqueña books are longer. They're like the full-length graphic novels that can be up to 80 pages. But Luz, Oro, and the Nueve Gigante books, they're actual comics. They're only about 20, 25 pages. So they're short adventures. And the idea is to kind of create these short adventures in between the larger books. And so that's the next book that's going to come out this fall. That's going to debut at the New York Comic Con. And then we're going to do another edition that's going to debut in Puerto Rico. We're actually going to do a giant size edition. So it's going to be like, I can't fit it on the screen. It's literally going to be like 11 by 17. So it's going to be a massive comic book and the regular size comic book. And then we actually have it. If you look, wait, which finger is it? It's this one right there. The Gigante on a podium, on a pedestal. Is that what's called?
It's a pedestal, yeah.
Right. And see this right here. This is Luz. Over here, that's Oro. All the way over here, this is La Borinqueña. These are the action figure prototypes. So these are the 3D printed resin figures. They were hand painted so that the factory in China could use them as an example when the figures went into production. So these were produced as one-offs to show us what proportionally and colors would look like, and they became part of the exhibition. But I decided to add the Gigante to the show, even though the Gigante is not an actual toy that we produced, because I just think she just looks so dope, and I just wanted her to be in the show, so I just threw it in there, and it became the biggest hit. Everyone was like, "Eso!" It was bugging. Everybody was bugging.
I wish I could see it.
Yeah, I'll send you guys a picture. There's a few Instagram videos where people made videos.
Yeah.
What? They're like 360 videos, because it's about 18 inches tall. It's huge. It's a huge robot. You know, there's a lot of really cool pieces. This piece right here, I'm excited about because
Yep.
right here.
Yeah.
This is actually a collaboration with me and Crash One, who is a pioneer in graffiti culture. He has almost like 5 decades of a career, because he started like when he was like 11 or 12 as a graffiti artist. This piece over here is actually painted all the way right there. That one's actually painted by Kyung, my wife, who's also a fine artist.
She's
And then
an
the
artist.
walls are filled with the original black and white artwork from the actual comics. We colored the walls so that we kind of create an immersive experience for the visitors to feel like they're inside of an actual comic book, because comic book artwork is actually black and white. So by painting the walls and adding the Bende dots, which comes from how comic books and magazines were originally produced with this kind of like dot matrix, it creates this immersive experience. And this is just one of the 3 salones. So when you kind of like walk through the salones, it's like you're turning giant pages of a comic book.
Yeah, no, that was incredible, man. That was amazing. We appreciate you so much.
Definitely. So, any advice you would give to an artist who's trying to follow in your footsteps and they just need guidance?
The only advice I would impart, it applies to everything with art, right? You have to be committed to it, just like you brush your teeth every day and night, right? You have to make art for the sake of it, not for the profit of it, not because someone is telling you to do it, not because somebody hired to do it. And if you're illustrating, it's important to try as often as possible to draw every day and to date everything you're drawing so that you could track your growth and develop. And it's also dope to revisit illustrations, to redraw them. If you're writing, it's important to consistently write, keep a journal, whether it's digital or traditional. But quite frankly, that's where the advice kind of like stops, because what I've created, I don't think anybody can emulate. And I'm not saying that from a position of vanity. Like, what I've created, I don't even understand what I've created. And it involves these characters, my activism, my voice, my charity, my vision for how this all looks. This is a model that doesn't exist. So I wasn't inspired by that or by this. I was inspired by a lot of different things. I've taken inspiration from hip hop, graffiti, serigrafia, actual comics, manga, young lords, you know, understanding the power of propaganda, right? Young lords were wizards and geniuses when how they used Palante to reach so many people with these incredibly graphic, beautifully graphic designed covers. Dope, like really, really dope stuff. Embracing the concept that the best art you've created is the next piece of art you're going to create. And when you kind of like work from that perspective, then you embrace humility, embrace creativity, and allow yourself the space to consistently and continually grow. And I think that's the only way to do it.